For those who don't know, Pat is also an avian veterinarian and very involved in parrot rescue and conservation. And Jessica, welcome. Maybe you could put in the chat, Jessica, where you are. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for joining us. Please put in the chat where you are and why you're here today. And I'm going to get started. We are recording this, so people who are unable to come or people in the future can watch this learning journey. Even though I'm with One Earth Conservation, this learning journey is being hosted by Ecohana, formerly known as Earth Regenerators. A few people here have been involved in the past with Earth Regenerators. Some are still here with us at Ecohana, and others know me through One Earth Conservation. And we'll talk about all of that a bit. Oh, and somebody has a parrot. Is that you, Sunny? So I would first like to start with a quote from David Attenborough. He says, "It seems to me that the natural world is the greatest source of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living." And I have a feeling everybody here would agree with that. Here in Ecohana, we always take just a few moments to center ourselves. So I'd like to start with everyone just getting comfortable in your chair. You can leave your camera on or off, whatever you prefer. Close your eyes or just blur your focus. And let's just take 3 deep breaths together. And when you're ready, just open your eyes and come back into our space. And let's welcome Maureen. Hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Please put your name and where you are in the chat and maybe a sentence about why you're here today. And since people came at all different times and we're not so large, maybe we can just take a minute to go around and have each other also introduce themselves out loud. I'll start with myself. I'm Gail Koelln. I'm a founding member of Ecohana and a former member of Earth Regenerators. I am also the co-director of One Earth Conservation, and we do parrot conservation in Latin America. And I live here in Queens in New York City. And I'm just gonna pass it to someone else, and maybe then you can pass it to the next person. So how about you, Natalie? Please just say who you are and keep it short, please.
Okay. So I'm Natalie Van Turnhout. I'm Belgian, but I travel around a lot. So at the moment, I'm in California. In Belgium, I'm part of the conservation of a heath area that we try to restore and conserve and fight a little with the farmers around. And why I'm here is I want to reconnect with with Ecohana. I used to be Earth Regenerator, but I kind of lost touch when that stopped. And I want to see or want to get inspired more for how to work with people, not just conserving an area, but more an earth regenerator kind of thing. So how we can involve people more instead of just what we do at the moment, try to conserve the area and people are the bad ones.
And please choose someone to pass to.
Oh yeah, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen. With For the Love of Birds Parrot Rescue. Myself and a few other women started the rescue. Actually, this coming March will be 10 years, and we were with a different parrot rescue before that. So I've been involved with this for a long time. I've obviously enamored with all wildlife, but especially parrots and birds. I've done a couple of eco tours in Peru and Brazil to see birds in their natural, you know, environment. And I just love always learning more and doing what I can to help. Sunny.
Hi, I'm Sunny. I'm American, but I live in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And I work with Proyecto Santa Maria, which is a parrot. We rescue native parrots from Mexico and rehabilitate them and return them back into the wild. And I do the parrot training and all the English stuff for them. Say no one speaks English except me. And I also was really happy to be part of the Parrot Conservation Corps this year with Gail and Laura Kim. Okay, so I don't know I don't have everybody's name. So Richard.
Richard, you may not have heard. Sunny selected you next to introduce yourself.
Okay, Sunny, thank you. Yeah, this is Rich Weiner, and I'm the executive director for a refuge for saving the wildlife. And my wife and I run the rescue. Have so for almost 40 years now. And I'm looking to join together the forces with like-minded people and learn and network and try and help more parents.
And if you could please pass it to someone else.
Okay, I am going to pass it to Pat.
Are you there, Pat? She put a note that she was stepping away.
Okay, Maureen.
Hi, I'm Maureen. I'm probably just going to stay off camera today. I had surgery just a couple days ago, and I'm still in the process of recovering. And so I'm here today just to kind of listen in. I am not directly involved in any parrot conservation work currently. I did work with Laura Kim many years ago down in Los Angeles at Aviculture Institute. And that's how I know of her. And I recently reconnected with her and have always had a great interest in conservation work and not only parrot conservation work, but I've done some wildlife rehabilitation in the past and am a member of the Bird Alliance. And like I said, I'm not currently doing any kind of conservation work, but just am continually trying to learn more and remain educated about the situation that's going on with wildlife. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Maureen. Would you like to pass to someone else?
How about Karen?
Karen went already. There's Jessica or Sahitha.
Okay,
or
how about
Pat?
Jessica?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica. I'm a biologist and a parrot behavioral consultant in Quebec, near Montreal. Sorry for my accent. My English is not really fluid since I'm a French speaker. So, and I'm here to learn more about parrots. I lead a small organization called Perrot de Nature, which means parrot by nature. And we do a lot of education and raise awareness about the parrots, their reality in captivity, how they're important in biodiversity. So I'm here to learn more about that and continue forming myself in this world of the event world, in fact. So I'll pass to Sahid. Yeah, sorry if I mispronounce it.
Alethea, we're not hearing you. I know Sahithia's with us from India, so if you're having issues, maybe just repeat your introduction in the chat. And I'm sorry that we cannot hear you. So I'm going to just call on Vivek. Vivek, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I can first repeat Sahitya's introduction just for her. I know she said she's from Coimbatore, India, and once again involved in conservation and is here to learn. So welcome, Sahitya.
Thank you,
And
Vivek. Good idea.
yeah, and my name's Vivek. I know nothing about parrot conservation, but I just do some of the technical things in the background for Ecohana. And I'm maybe my interest might be more in like things like knowing more about water and streams. I'm starting to get more involved with that in Central Texas where I am. But you know, one thing we always carried both from ER and into Ecohana was holding other perspectives. So I don't think I've ever really heard the parrot's perspective. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
And Pat, are you back with us? Well, I'll just say I know. Oh, there you are. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, my apologies. I'm in the middle of some morning chores and trying to keep an ear out too. So I'm here just to keep, sorry, also I have terrible allergies this morning. I'm here basically to make sure that Gail does a good job and doesn't make any mistakes or anything like that. No, that's not true. Gail and Laura Kim do a fantastic job. But I'm here to be in the background and listen. I think the Parrot's perspective is absolutely the only way to approach many, many problems in the world of conservation and health and well-being of wild parrots, as well as those that share our homes with us. So something that we just have to always keep in mind, that we can only see through human eyes, but as you can hear, sometimes you need a little help from your friends to open those eyes up to a different perspective. So I'm glad everyone's here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Pat. And I should say, Pat is a real expert here. And you can back me up if I do make mistakes. You can correct me. Yeah, a number of you may have heard us mention Laura Kim. Laura Kim Joyner is the co-director of One Earth Conservation with me. I call her the Jane Goodall of parrots. That's basically gives you the picture of what she does. The Parrot Conservation Corps that Sunny mentioned is a program that we do that's a year-long course where we meet monthly with people to teach them about parrots, parrot conservation, and yeah, Jane Goodall only more so. Well, I don't know about that, but certainly as much. Anyway, I'm delighted to have you all here. So just to give you an overview, what we're going to be doing here is today we're going to just talk about biodiversity in general. Some of this might be information you already know, but we have people of different backgrounds here with different knowledge. So think of it, if you already know, as a review. I'm using a lot of videos in this learning journey. And what I would like to do is spend about the first hour or so watching different videos, and then have the second hour for discussion. I have some discussion questions, or we could just go to wherever our conversation takes us. But I want this to be interactive and not just sitting and listening. So biodiversity, you may or may not know, actually biodiversity loss is as big, if not bigger, as climate change. And the two interact a lot. Unfortunately, it seems like I used to be, in addition to someone who does wildlife conservation, I used to be a climate activist. And there were many, many years where I was so frustrated with how the world wasn't listening. And now, even though the world kind of is listening, it really isn't. But it's better. At least people know what it is and they're aware of it. Well, that's where we are now with biodiversity loss. Most people don't even know it's happening. They don't know what it means or anything. So I figured we should start at the beginning for those who are less aware. And for those who do know, these videos are still of great interest. There's all kinds of information in them that I didn't know when I was watching them and choosing which ones to focus on. The next 4 sessions are based on something that was put together by a new coalition that's called the International Alliance for the Protection of Parrots, or IAPP for short. And some of the people here are involved with that. And we welcome anyone who's not, but cares about parrots deeply to join us. The bottom line is we are trying to stop the demand for parrots to be kept as pets. Parrots are wild animals. They should not be in cages. They should not be pets. And to be honest, we feel that way about all birds. But we held what we call a Parrot Crisis Summit at the beginning of October, which was recorded. So I am basing the next 4 weeks on those sessions. We will focus on one session at a time, and they are the first day it was a 2-day, half-day event. One flocked, how the parrot trade harms wild parrots. One flock, how the parrot trade harms captive parrots. And we have quite a few people here who work with captive parrots, so that one might be of particular interest to you. One World, how people are harmed when parrots are harmed. There's a lot of harm that happens to people. And One World, the harm to ecosystems and the climate when parrots are harmed. So parrots are kind of unique in that way that they cover all these various spaces in a way that, let's say, maybe tigers don't. Not that tigers aren't important either, they are. But that's why I'm calling this the parrot perspective. It's unique. Okay, so we're going to start with a video that was put together by World Wildlife Fund. So I'm going to share my screen, and I did practice this, and hopefully it's still going to work. Get all the boxes checked. Okay. So I need to get this here. Okay, this one is first.
We've all seen photos of rainforests destroyed, rivers littered with plastic, news of wildfires and species going extinct. Biodiversity loss may not be happening at our doorstep, but it should hit close to home. Everything on our planet, including us, is interconnected and interdependent. Biodiversity is like a delicate set of bricks or Jenga tower. The more bricks and the more connections between them, the stronger the tower. But when one piece falls, the whole structure can come crashing down. Here's why you should care about biodiversity loss, no matter where you are in the world. What exactly is biodiversity? Here's a clue. We often call it something else, nature. We tend to think of nature as forests, oceans, rivers, and mountains, but it's more than that. Nature is the incredible variety of all life on Earth, plants and animals. The iconic panda, or redwood tree, microorganisms in our soil, fish in our rivers, corals in our seas. All these species and the spaces they call home make up biodiversity. Losing healthy habitats means losing access to clean air, water, fertile soils, and many other natural resources essential to our survival, livelihoods, and well-being. It also means losing our greatest allies against the climate crisis. Forests, oceans, grasslands, and wetlands absorb greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, while mangroves and coral reefs act as natural defenses against floods and hurricanes. Falling plant and animal populations impacts us too, but it can be harder to see how. Let's start small, literally. We're talking genes. Different combinations of genes cause small variations in appearance, build, and behavior even among members of the same species. Characteristics that can prove beneficial as environments change and new challenges emerge. But as populations drop, so does gene diversity, making species like those we depend on for food and agriculture less adaptable to stresses such as diseases, pests, drought, and climate change. And when we lose any species, it can spell disaster for countless others. Here's an example. Tiny yet mighty. Bees and other insects play a giant role in creating healthy ecosystems. If we lose insects, we don't only lose our pollinators, we'd lose the birds that feed on them and keep the pests that harm crops and habitats under control. But this domino effect doesn't end on land. Life on water is affected as birds help fertilize coral reefs and other marine ecosystems through nutrients in their droppings. Ecosystems that nourish the fish that over 3 billion people rely on for food and an essential source of protein. But enough of theory. Here's the truth. Right now, we are losing biodiversity at an alarming and unprecedented rate. 500,000 insect species are threatened with extinction. The average population sizes of wildlife have dropped by 68% since 1970. We've already destroyed half of the world's corals and lose forest areas the size of 27 football fields every minute. These aren't just sad statistics. These are sirens. Signs that we need urgent action from communities, businesses, governments, world leaders, and each and every one of us to transform our broken relationship with nature. We are and always will be part of the equation. So now, let's be part of the solution.
I thought that was a great introduction to biodiversity loss. By the way, I forgot to introduce the little guy behind me. This is Dusty. Dusty is going to be 34 years old in February, and he's a cockatiel, which are native to Australia. When we got Dusty, my husband and I, we were not aware of everything we are aware of now. And I would say, I assume most of you agree that parrots shouldn't be pets, but if you really want one or you want to help out some of the rescues here, it's better to adopt a bird than to buy one, which is what I would do if I get another bird someday. And I see we have a new person here, Charisse, welcome. Charisse, if you'd like to just, you want to introduce yourself quickly, your name, where you are, and why you're here today.
Well, hey there. I am in Colorado, and I am a parrot welfare advocate, and I work in parrot rescue, but I also believe that they should not be pets. So
welcome. We
Yep.
just finished talking about that. Thank you for being here. And here's Laura Kim. She did tell me she would try to make it. Laura Kim, you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone why you're here today?
Hi there, everybody. Sorry, I'm late. We have Sunday morning activities that we do around here. Co-director with Gail with One Earth Conservation, where we totally hang out addressing the parrot crisis and how working with parrots points the way to work for the betterment of all beings. So I'm so glad to be here at the very tail end, just to say hi and to be so supportive of Gail and other people on this call.
Oh, we're far from the tail end. we're a half hour into a 2-hour session. So everyone stay as long as you can. If you need to leave, it's fine. And by the way, this is being recorded and will be available to watch on the Ecohana website, as well as One Earth Conservation website. So we just finished watching a recording that was an introduction to what is biodiversity and what does biodiversity loss mean. Now I have another similar shorter video that's from PBS, had a series on biodiversity loss, which I actually haven't watched, so I think I'm going to in the future. So give me a second and I will share that one now.
Important for us to understand we're facing a crisis, and one that has consequences for us all. It threatens our ability to feed ourselves, to control our climate. It even puts us at greater risk of pandemic diseases such as COVID-19. It's never been more important for us to understand the effects of biodiversity loss, of how it is that we ourselves are responsible for it. Only if we do that will we have any hope of averting disaster. In 2019, the United Nations asked over 500 scientists to investigate the current state of the natural world.
This is the first time there's been a global assessment where all the evidence has been pulled together. Thousands and thousands of papers.
We're losing biodiversity at a rate that is truly unprecedented in human history.
All groups in the natural world are in decline, which means their populations are getting smaller day by day.
Since 1970, vertebrate animals, things like birds, mammals, amphibians and reptiles, have declined by 60% in total. Large mammals have on average disappeared from 3/4 of the range where they're historically found.
What's different is that it's happening simultaneously in the Amazon, in Africa, in the Arctic. It's happening not at one place and not with one group of organisms, but with all biodiversity everywhere on the planet.
It means that 1 million species out of 8 million species on Earth are now threatened with extinction. 500,000 plants and animals and 500,000 insects.
I don't know why it shrunk like that, but okay. All right, the next, for those who came late, I'm showing a few videos for a little while, and then we're gonna have discussion and questions for discussion after we finish with these. So the next one, I'm gonna give a little more of an introduction to. It's from the Aspen Institute, and it's called The Other Crisis, Biodiversity Loss and How We Protect the Planet. I suggest you watch this through the lens of now knowing the results of our election. When this was recorded, it was before the election had happened. And also how, elections in other parts of the world and the international meetings such as the COP29 and the biodiversity meeting that happened this past fall. By the way, the Mission Institute is a global nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. It was founded in 1949, and it drives change through dialogue, leadership, and action to help solve the most important challenges facing the US and the world. This one is the longest video we're going to see today. It's about 18 minutes long and was posted a year ago. Oops. Give me a second here to do the share.
I don't mean to be dramatic, but we are undergoing a biodiversity crisis, and that's what we're here to talk about. It is directly related to the climate crisis, and yet oftentimes is sort of on the sidelines of that conversation. I can't really imagine two better people to speak with about this than Monica Medina, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International and Scientific Affairs, as well as the Special Envoy for Biodiversity and Water Resources, which is a long way of saying that she's at the center of the Biden administration's efforts on these biodiversity issues, and Gerardo Ceballos, who is an ecologist and conservationist at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a leading researcher over the past decades on this topic. We're going to talk about solutions, but Gerardo, I want to start with you just to sort of set the stage. Most people here probably know there's a biodiversity crisis, but can you just give us the context of, how bad is it?
Well, thank you very, very much, Monica. Thank you very much. Well, we all know about the climate change problem, but actually the biodiversity problem is more urgent and is more acute. So it's often called the silent crisis because we hardly see the animals that are becoming extinct and the habitats. And just to give you an idea, the number of species that become extinct in the last 100 years, and we know only 2% of the species that live in this planet, but the vertebrates, mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians that become extinct in the last 100 years would have taken 10,000 years to become extinct under normal times. If the species that are on the brink of extinction become extinct in the next 20, 50 years, the rate of extinction that will have taken 2,500,000 years to become extinct. That's the magnitude. And the extinction crisis is the only irreversible crisis, environmental crisis, because one species is gone, it is gone. Let me give you very quickly one example. There were 10 million elephants in 1990, in the 1900s. There were only 1.3 million in the 1970s. There are around 300,000 now, and we're losing one elephant every 30 minutes by the illegal trade. There will be no elephants in the wild, probably, in 20, 25 years if this continues. So the problem, the environmental crisis, is huge, it's gigantic, it's unseen, but it's the basis to solve, as we will see in a few minutes, the part of the climate crisis.
Well, thank you for grounding this conversation. Monica, I opened by saying that these issues oftentimes don't receive the attention they deserve, but at the same time, there are many ongoing conversations, which, as I said, you're at the center of. The High Seas Treaty was agreed, I guess, less than a week ago. There's the Convention on Biodiversity discussions that happened last year, the plastics negotiations ongoing. The list could go on and on. But I want to ask you to just give us an overview of the efforts and what do they all add up to?
Thank you, Justin. It's such an honor to be here on this panel with so many other wonderful people helping to close out this incredible convening by the Aspen Institute. It was, we had a big group of people here from the administration, so this is an important conversation. I want to thank the Vice President for coming and Ali Zaidi, the President's Climate Advisor, for coming. This is really an important topic for the Biden administration. We are working very, very hard to bring together all the powers that we have through the government, whole of government approach to tackling the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, because we know that we cannot tackle the climate crisis without conserving biodiversity. 30% of what we need to do to solve the climate crisis will have to be done through biodiversity conservation and nature-based solutions. So there you have it. Now, the biodiversity crisis is driven by more than just the climate crisis, but we can help to solve the climate crisis. In fact, we must by working on the biodiversity crisis. So that's, to me, why the agreements that we're working on are so important. So let me mention the three that you talked about. The Convention on Biological Diversity, it's a global agreement. It's been in place for decades. The U.S. isn't even a member of this, but we participated actively in a meeting in December, the most recent conference of the parties, COP, where the world agreed to a global biodiversity framework goal of 30% of the planet conserved by 2030. That's huge. We had never set out that kind of ambitious goal. You know, the 1.5 degree goal for climate is a really ambitious goal. We needed one for biodiversity, and we got it. And most interestingly, China and Canada co-chaired the final meeting where that agreement was achieved. So really big coming together of the world around that. But how do you do that if the ocean isn't part of the deal? Most of the ocean, 50% of the planet, is in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas. And until last weekend, we didn't have a way to protect any of that from all the various different uses that are covered under something called the Law of the Sea Treaty. But last weekend, the world came together again, and we haven't agreed the text formally, but we have agreed, or we haven't agreed the convention or the agreement formally, but we have agreed on the words. The text is frozen, it's being translated now, but within the next couple of months, the world will come together again and agree on how we can actually achieve conservation on the high seas. That's huge. And I'm really pleased that it got so much media attention, Justin, so I hope that the media will continue to write about this important crisis in biodiversity. The last way we're really tackling it now in a big way is through plastic pollution. We're drowning in plastic. Amazing statistic. For every person on the planet, there are 21,000 pieces of plastic in the ocean today, and within 6 years that will double. 6 years that will double. We are drowning in plastic. And the world again came together in the last year, just a year ago, to decide to start another global agreement on protecting from plastic pollution, on ending plastic pollution. And we in the US government are working very hard to drive ambition in that agreement. And hopefully we'll set a really big goal, a big, ambitious, high target. We hope it will be ending plastic pollution by 2040. So it is important for governments to come together and make these agreements and drive change, just like others in the previous segments have talked about. We need indigenous peoples. I was really moved again by the previous presentation by the Nat Geo Explorer talking about indigenous peoples. We must include them in this discussion. They are the best stewards over hundreds of years, and we need their expertise and we need their help because they do have so much biodiversity within their control. The last thing I'll say is finance. Without finance, we won't be able to conserve and protect biodiversity. And that's something that we in the US government are really focused on right now. We are the largest contributor to the Global Environment Facility. We increased our contribution last year when it was re-upped, and now there's almost $2 billion in that facility that will be dedicated to nature finance. But it's hard to put a value and find finance for things that we've taken for granted for decades, thousands of years even. They're free, essentially. We have to change that. We have to change the way we think about nature and biodiversity and value it so that we can ensure that we will continue to protect it.
Well, I want to just ask one very quick follow-up, if you can, because I want to underscore how important this high seas agreement is. How, 2030 is just around the corner, really. How do you get there? How do you protect 30% of the world's high seas by then?
We have to really now explode out of the blocks trying to create these agreements. And the new treaty that we've negotiated requires us to go out and work through the other bodies that already control bits of the ocean. So there's a body that controls deep seabed mining, and there are a bunch of bodies that control regional fishing in the high seas. And we'll have to identify areas, go work through those bodies, but if the parties to this agreement decide that they think an area is deserving of conservation, then every country that agrees to that will have to go and vote in those other places. So we have a mechanism now to kind of bring everyone together around high seas protection, and that's going to get us a long way. We already have one big sort of high seas area in the Antarctic. There's an RFMO, a regional fishery management organization in the North Atlantic that's protected an area, and there are lots of areas being identified right now as we speak to start to make the case and draw the lines, literally draw the lines on the map to create protection. We also have to work hard on land. And that's where climate and nature and biodiversity finance and climate finance can all come together to help us conserve the Amazon and the Congo and all the parts around all the places around the world that will be those natural carbon sinks that we cannot get to the solution without.
Great. So Gerardo, I want to come to you and just ask, when we've been talking about international agreements, and then how does that play out in national governments, but could you just talk a little bit about what all this might look like or mean at a local level?
Well, yes. First of all, I would like to say that in terms of the extinction crisis, the good news is that there is still time. The bad news is that it's rapidly closing. The opportunity is rapidly closing. What's happened in the next 15 or 20 years will define what the species are left on the planet. And as Monica says properly, that 30% is by 30 is very ambitious. It's not enough. What we have to do is to protect every single ecosystem, and we're trying to restore every single species that is in the planet now. Unless we do something like that at this scale, and basically, very quickly, I was telling a colleague of mine who wrote this paper, we changed the paradigm that the extinction crisis was not normal in 2015 in a paper that became very important in that sense. And basically, when we talk about investment, we need billions, trillions of dollars probably in the next 20, 30 years to do the job. And if we don't do that, is when but this is probably 1% of the GDP of the planet, and very quickly, as if you go to the doctor and say you may have cancer, but it will cost you $1, and you have $10,000 in the bank, you say, no, it's too expensive. That's exactly the same. So at the local level, there are many things working out. I have a small foundation, we're only 3 of us, but in Mexico, we have been working with the local communities. They own a big chunk of land in the border with Guatemala, and we have made agreements. We're protecting now 1 million hectares of forest, and we're going to try to protect 1.5 million hectares. And in one of those deals, 200,000 hectares, around 450,000 acres, is costing us around $2 million a year. That's all. I think if we will invest something like $5 billion in the planet every year for the next year, we will save all the tropical forests and all the forests that are required for human survival.
So I want to follow up on, I alluded in my sort of opening remarks to the connection between climate and biodiversity. Monica, you alluded to this. Gerardo, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I mean, could you just explain to the audience why biodiversity is not just about protecting species, but also about protecting all of us and links to the climate
That's a very
crisis?
good question. People always say, well, I'm so sorry, the species will have to become extinct if we are going to survive. Let me give you very quick examples. We scientists call ecosystem services all the benefits we get from the nature, the proper work of nature, like the proper combination of the gases of the atmosphere. If this wall is made of bricks, every time we take a brick, the wall starts to work less properly. And so, sooner or later, if we take one of those bricks, one of the species will collapse. So basically, life on the planet depends on all the plants and animals and the functional ecosystems to have the conditions to have life in general and to have human lives in particular. So every time we lose a species, every time we destroy a forest, we're eroding the capabilities of the planet to maintain life in general and to maintain human life in particular. And I finish with this. We really think there may be a possibility of a collapse of civilization, the way we have been enjoying these great opportunities by living in great places and so on in the next few years, unless we do a massive effort with no similar to what we did in the war in order to stop the problem.
I like that image of ecosystems as a wall of bricks, and we're pulling the bricks away. Monica, I'd like to ask you the same question, but then with one twist, which is just, how do you think about trying to bring these conversations into climate conversations where they're missing? How do you bring that message and that knowledge to those conversations?
Well, thinking back to my first COP, if you can believe it, my first climate COP was Glasgow, and I'll never forget Boris Johnson, having led that effort to bring that COP together, said, it's not just about hugging bunnies. And it's true. I mean, it is. We love bunnies. We love nature and biodiversity, but we love a planet that's healthy and that sustains us. And so it's not hard to bring those conversations together. I've seen over the last 2 COPs an increasing emphasis, climate COPs, an increasing emphasis on biodiversity. I think we have an upcoming UN water conference that will bring together biodiversity and a healthy environment. Water is essential to life. It's also a huge part of the climate crisis, either drought or coastal and inundating floods. So I think increasingly these conversations are coming together. And if you throw in the pandemic, which is another place where the loss of biodiversity has cost us dearly, if we could conserve the places that we need for climate and biodiversity and for zoonotic spillover prevention, oh my gosh, we've solved the world's biggest crises, and we've saved probably a lot of money and so many lives. So to me, the conversations are naturally coming together. People do understand these things are interconnected, but we have to keep talking about nature and biodiversity. It can't all be just about sort of clean technologies and sort of the more market-driven, currently market-driven, but hopefully we'll be changing the way markets work and they'll take biodiversity and nature into account. It can't just be about energy transition.
Right, we need to recognize the importance of biodiversity for those markets to function, right? I mean, that's a hugely important point. Gerardo, do you want to just answer that same question that, you know, how do you better mainstream the biodiversity conversation? Just to close us off, we have just a few seconds left.
Well, first of all, places like this. I concur that the word is spreading, but you all need to help us to make it louder, to really emphasize. Every time you talk about climate change, please remember that biodiversity relies on you, and we rely on biodiversity.
Can I throw in one last thing? Relying on you, please recycle your plastic badge. Outside, there are bins for it. That's how you can help just today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Some news, some information to use right away. But thank you for this really informative conversation to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more that's a little bit more about the problem, and then I actually have a few more inspirational videos that are a little bit that are about what people are doing. And I want to welcome Catherine, who joined us during that video. Catherine, do you want to just introduce yourself and say where you're from and why you're here today?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I am from Quebec in Canada, actually, and I'm here today because I want to learn more about the concern about the natural environment for the parrot. And since today it's the National Bird Day, so I think it's important to make sure I have all the information so I will be able to share the information after that, and I will be able to, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the word in English, but I will be able to, c'est quoi qu'on dit quand on veut faire de la sensibilisation?
Raise awareness.
Yeah, with people.
I'm guessing you two know each other, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome, Catherine. And by the way, what I could do at the end of this is I can put the links to all these videos in the comments section in Ecohana if you go to the event. And eventually that's where we'll also have links to the recordings in case you want to share these with anyone. So, okay, the next one is actually about the IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. That is some mouthful. And they are the group like I think it's IPPC, I forget, the group that meets about climate change every year. This is the group that meets about biodiversity loss, and they have like a little 3-minute promotional video about who they are, and then we'll move on to a bunch of mostly TED Talks on things people are doing about all this. Again, for those who came late, we're focusing more on biodiversity loss in general today, and then we'll get in specifically into the parrots the end of today and then starting next week. So here's the IPBES video. Give me a second again to get to that. Oh, I lost it. Okay.
IPBES has as a mission to strengthen the science policy interface.
IPBES is the leading global authority on the state of knowledge and science about biodiversity, ecosystem services, and nature's contributions to people. It currently has 147 member states. During the 1990s, while the issue of global warming was being actively discussed, the debate on biodiversity loss was not so advanced.
So they did not really feel themselves personally connected to the notion of biodiversity.
In the 2000s, the importance of biodiversity began to be recognized, as evidenced by the publication of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, a global survey of the state of biodiversity conducted at the request of the United Nations. After many countries expressed the need for more knowledge and science on biodiversity, IPBES was established in 2012. Since then, more than 10 reports have been prepared and published with the cooperation of more than 1,000 scientists from around the world.
We have scientists from all regions of the world, that we have experts with very different backgrounds.
Among the reports IPBES has worked on, one of the most successful was the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services released in 2019.
The fact that it literally was on the front page of every major news outlet globally.
The report included the fact that as many as 1 million of the Earth's 8 million species of plants and animals could become extinct within a few decades.
That is 10 to 100 times faster than the normal background rate of species replacement in nature.
Many countries and international organizations started moving aggressively to address this serious issue.
You know, we've had impact at all kinds of levels. So IPBES's work was taken up by the G20 and by the G7.
The goal set by the 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2022 included taking urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. Moreover, IPBES reports are contributing to the sustainability strategies and ESG activities that companies have been undertaking in recent years.
We are ready to help, and the scientists stand ready to provide this information to everybody who needs it.
I believe that there is a bright future for all of the species on Earth with whom we share the planet.
And that's the kind of optimism we need, right? Okay, so now we're going to move on. The first TED Talk I'm going to show you is called The 5 Values for Repairing the Harms of Colonialism. The person speaking is Jing Corpuz, and it's from 2022. Oh, I should mention that the Aspen Institute video, I think, was from 2023. And thanks for the reminder that today is International Avian Day, I think, something like that. So good timing for that. Okay, so let's move on. National Bird Day. Laura Kim, of course, knows. National Bird Day. Okay, so let's move on to the first TED Talk. Okay, why are we not hearing anything? Oh.
Ay wada akis na insiguda. Bigbigak ay wada akis na insigudan ay ili, nan umili ay linape. Mengasingak ay makigagay kanda kayo amin. Saken si Jing, nagapu akis nan bilbilig, nan ili mi ay busaw, ili nan kankanaay igurot, ay kananda. Gawis ay mas dumyo amin. And I wish I can continue in my language so that I can make no mistakes. I greet you in the language of my indigenous Kankanaay Igurut ancestors. And I acknowledge that I am in the homelands of the Lenape people. I am Jing, and I come from the central mountain range of the northern part of the Philippines. If you've heard of the Banawe rice terraces, which is one of the wonders of the modern world, that is the region where I am from. My ancestors built these terraces by hand as a community through the centuries. It is their intimate knowledge of nature and of the way that the river flows, the waters flow, and the waters are stored that enables these terraces to be irrigated without the help of machines. The art and science of building and irrigating these terraces is magical. They have been sustainably and beautifully irrigated for centuries. Now, my people are also known as one of the unconquered and uncolonized tribes of the Cordillera Mountains. We successfully resisted more than 300 years of Spanish colonization because the mountains that we nurtured and cared for protected us in return. Now, to be sure, the Spanish attempted. They heard about our gold. So they sent many expeditions into the mountains to mine our gold and to tax us. But the historical records show, I kid you not, members of the expedition were sent back inevitably and sometimes without their heads. That's right. We were a headhunting people. And the name of my mother's hometown, Busao, comes from the word buso, which means headhunter. And this is why I'm always joking around with my colleagues. I am a recovering headhunter. When we drove the Spanish out of the Philippines in the late 1800s, they were unfortunately replaced by a more creative colonizer, the Americans. And the pressure on our homelands increased exponentially. They wanted to mine our gold, to dam our rivers, and to log our forests that we had cared for at the risk of our own lives. When they wanted to dam the Chico River, which is the lifeblood of the mountains where I'm from, they were met with fierce resistance and protests from the people. Our burial grounds, sacred places, and amazing terraces would have been drowned and lost forever. And this was simply a spiritual and cultural price that my people were not willing to pay. This project was funded by the World Bank. And because of the fierce resistance of indigenous peoples, they were forced to back off in the 1980s and to put in place an indigenous people safeguard policy to make sure that development aggression doesn't happen again in indigenous territories without consent. Okay, so that's a new word and a big word. Don't worry, I'll explain it. So what is development aggression? Well, development is physical or economic infrastructure that's put in place in a community to help them thrive and to reach their goals. Like, for example, if there is not enough affordable housing in a community or inadequate access to culturally appropriate education, development would build affordable houses and enable access to culturally appropriate education. Simple. But development aggression is the opposite. It is development that exploits the resources of the community, and not for the purpose of helping the community, but for the developer's gain. Okay? It is a manifestation of colonialism. And it is a very colonial worldview and comes from top-down decision-making. As Indigenous peoples, we perceive it as projects imposed without the consent of the community and in a manner that violates our rights. It falls within the paradigm of overproduction, overconsumption, and accumulation of wealth by individuals, which has proven to be not helpful at all for humanity and for the planet. Sometimes I wonder, and I really think about, why did my ancestors, why did my forebears resist the dams so strongly, usually at the cost of their own lives? The mountains are vast, and we could have moved away from the inundated areas. We could have gone to a different place that was not poisoned by the mines or that was not denuded by the logging. But my people explain that the struggle against the dams, the mining, and the logging is a struggle for our identity and for our cultural survival. It is a struggle to make sure that we have healthy territories to pass on to the future generations. And this is what I've discovered through all my travels and interactions with other Indigenous peoples. This is common among Indigenous peoples worldwide. The notion that we hold our lands, our waters, our territories, and our resources, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations. Makliing Dulag, who is a pangat or a peace pact holder, he famously said to the government bureaucrats who came to the territory to push the dam, "You ask us if we own the land and mock us by asking, 'Where is your title?' When we ask the meaning of your words, you taunt us by saying, 'Where are the documents to prove your ownership?' Titles, documents, proof of ownership. Such arrogance to think that you can own the land when we are instead owned by it. How can you own something that will outlive you? Only the people own the land because it's the people that live forever." As Indigenous peoples, we own our past, our present, and our future. Private development for the gain of the few and to the detriment of the community flies against the face of the reality of the generational existence of Indigenous peoples. So development aggression is actually an extension of a version of capitalism that pushes overconsumption, overproduction, and has no regard for the future generations. It's always more is better. Extract as much value and labor as you can from the land and from the people without caring for the future. So when I was younger, story time, I grew up with my grandparents, and they always told me, "Eat everything in your plate." I'm sure you've heard that as well. But there's a deeper undercurrent there. Eat everything on your plate in order to honor the hands that planted, nurtured, harvested, and cooked the food. He taught me about the concept of inayan, or do not do anything that might harm others, or things that are bad, evil, taboo, or unethical. So getting more than what you need deprives others. Getting more food than what you can eat deprives the hungry and dishonors those that produced it. He would ask me when he sees uneaten rice on my plate, "Don't you hear the rice crying?" And I would hear it crying. So until this day, I can't leave rice on my plate because I always hear the cries of the rice. Another concept that my relatives taught me is ipuyas nan gawis. Literally, spread the good. Spread the good values, the good virtues, practices, even material things. Another way of saying it in my language is adi taku bukudan di gawis. Adi taku bukudan di gawis. It means no one person should own what is good. It is to be shared with the community. It is an expression of reciprocity and honor for the collective, and it teaches us to care for the common good. So, these values, reciprocity, spirituality, not taking more than you need, obligation to future generations, and collective decision-making, all of these values are now finding their way into scientific studies and global scientific assessments on the status of biodiversity and ecosystem services, climate change, and land degradation. So what we all need to do now is what Indigenous peoples have always known and have always done. As we face the negative effects of biodiversity loss, climate change, extreme weather events like the flooding, the wildfires, the droughts, the scientists, they're slowly moving towards the conclusion that it is only through Indigenous wisdom and values and ways of caring for territory that we see the path towards our salvation. The path towards our salvation is not through more development. It's not through more consumption or more production. Overconsumption, development aggression, overproduction are all manifestations of destructive colonialism that has harmed the planet and that has undermined the Indigenous wisdom that the scientists acknowledge that we all need. So, think about it. In spite of everything, all the challenges we have faced, more than 500 years of colonization, all of the development aggression, we are still here, Indigenous peoples, and our values have thrived and have endured. We have survived. And the least we can do is to honor this resistance by decolonizing our structures, decolonizing the way we think, decolonizing our practices so that we can stop the destruction of the planet. Colonization and its tentacles has always deprived people and planet of the things that we naturally and rightfully need. It is only by decolonizing our understanding of history that we will understand how we have arrived at this planetary crisis. And it is only through honoring Indigenous peoples and being inspired by the values, providing the support and the resources in order for Indigenous peoples to continue to resist development aggression and colonialism, that we can save ourselves and save the planet. So I invite us, let's listen. Let's be inspired, let us learn, and let us support the struggles of Indigenous peoples. This is the only path forward. Thank you.
I should mention that One Earth Conservation in a number of our projects work closely with Indigenous people. And we have seen how amazing the results can be. Not that they're perfect, they are human, like the rest of us, but they do amazing work and they are quite committed at times to this work. Now, this is a related video. It's only a couple of minutes long about something that happened at COP16, the Biodiversity Summit that just happened this past November.
How many times have you had to tug at your boots
Sorry
throughout the
about
day
the
to keep
ad.
them looking perfect? Annoyed by
Indigenous delegations broke into cheers after Colombia's environment minister announced that diplomats from more than 190 countries reached an historic agreement at the UN Biodiversity Summit to give them a permanent voice on nature conservation decisions.
This is an unprecedented event in the history of multilateral agreements on the environment. The indigenous groups and the local communities of the world are connected through our knowledge systems on how to take care of life and biodiversity.
It was the most important announcement at the end of 2 weeks of often contentious negotiations and deep disagreements between the countries to try to stem the dramatic loss of biodiversity and nature by 2030. Delegates for the first time adopted a measure to recognize the importance of the role of people of African descent, and another one to force corporations to share the benefits on products such as medicine created using genetic data from animal and plants. But despite these announcements, there was no real progress on the most important issue: major funding to tackle the loss of biodiversity globally. Billions of dollars are needed, but only 400 million have been pledged.
Actually, the target is 20 billion a year by 2025. So as one very good minister said this week, it's like saying that the bridge costs 500 million to restore and you give me 5 million. It's just not going to happen. So we need this money to flow from the global north to the global south as fast as possible. We're looking at a protection crisis, we're looking at a restoration crisis, we're looking at a situation where it's going to affect all of our lives, but it's not yet taken seriously by the treasuries of our countries in the global north. And until that time, we're going to continue to see the extinction crisis get worse.
In the end, it was a bittersweet summit with a number of undoubtedly important announcements, but that missed the mark in the ever more urgent effort to reverse the accelerating loss of nature and biodiversity, something that the delegates will have to continue to tackle next year at the COP30 on climate change in Brazil, and 2 years from now in the next COP17 in Armenia. Alessandro Rampietti, Al Jazeera, Cali.
Make sure.
That's an example of good news, bad news, right? Now here, this one is near and dear to my heart because it's called Let Your Garden Grow Wild. And this is something I have been working on in my own little plot here. I live in a one-family house in Queens in New York City. And I have started planting native both in my front and backyards. And that's what this one. So this is something we can all do wherever we are.
So, full disclosure, I am the nerdiest gardener you are ever going to meet. Technically, I'm an ecological horticulturalist, which is a fancy way of saying that I design and manage gardens that are extravagantly beautiful, while also providing habitat for plant populations, wildlife communities, and even soil organisms. And you might wonder, isn't that what all gardeners do? Unfortunately, no. The vast majority of gardens are ecological deserts. And in fact, an incredible amount of environmental damage has been done in the name of making pretty gardens. In the US alone, we dump over 100 million pounds of insecticides, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizers on our lawns and gardens every year. There just isn't a garden pretty enough to be worth all of that. And the reality is that it's completely unnecessary. Gardens and landscapes that are absolutely gorgeous can also help the world around us. They can provide food, water, and shelter to wildlife. Gardens can and have brought back plants and animals from the brink of extinction. There is a movement happening all over the globe. Gardeners, garden designers, landscape architects, even entire cities are finding ways to beautify our environment while making space for the animals we share this land with. I've seen biodiversity return to one of the toughest places to live on the entire planet, the middle of New York City, where I cared for, designed, and helped build public parks and gardens. At Brooklyn Bridge Park, where I was director of horticulture, we took these massive, derelict shipping piers out over the water between Brooklyn and Manhattan and turned them into an 85-acre post-industrial public park. It was designed by MBVA and built out over a decade. And it's hard to imagine now, but this lush landscape was built on parched concrete. This is about as appealing to wildlife as a parking lot. And yet, just a few years after construction, we welcomed migratory birds, rare insects, and clouds of butterflies, all among millions and millions of park visitors. When people go to Brooklyn Bridge Park, they're usually there to play basketball or have a picnic. They have no idea that they're walking through a monarch habitat or a firefly sanctuary. It just reads as a beautiful park with lots of butterflies and magical evenings. And if we can do that in the middle of New York City, amidst all that traffic and concrete, you can do it anywhere. Indeed, we must incorporate habitat everywhere, immediately, especially in our cities. We are facing a biodiversity crisis of catastrophic proportions. We're changing the planet so quickly that plants and animals cannot keep up. You may have heard of the insect apocalypse, and unfortunately, it is just as terrifying as it sounds. We have lost nearly half of insects on planet Earth just since I was a little kid. Now, you might not like bugs, but they are still keeping you alive. 1 in every 3 bites of food that you eat is the direct result of insect pollination. And this isn't just a problem for humanity. Where we have the data, we've lost a quarter of our birds. In North America, it's 29%. Most of these birds feed their babies exclusively on insects. So it's not just climate change that we need to solve right now. There is some existential multitasking required of us. Thank goodness that there are solutions, and many of them literally involve planting flowers. So let's talk about gardening for biodiversity. Because while you might not be a gardener, I am still going to ask you to get your hands dirty. All it takes is a pot on your stoop to have a positive effect. The first thing we should all be doing are planting plants that are from the places where we're gardening. We call them native plants, and they're important because they evolved alongside of the wildlife there. Plants and animals often form relationships and even dependencies on each other. For example, the eastern red columbine is arguably the most cheerful of our spring wildflowers. But of course, they're not blooming for us. Their red flower heralds the return of the ruby-throated hummingbird, the East Coast's only hummingbird. After these tiny birds have flown thousands of miles on their migration from Central America to the Northeast, they rely on the sugary nectar of the columbine to refuel, and they have reason to believe that this flower will be waiting for them when they do. The columbine stores their nectar at the end of long spurs, where only the long tongues of the hummingbird can reach it. As the bird drinks the nectar, they pollinate the flower. Both organisms are benefiting here, and in fact, the ruby-throated hummingbird is the eastern red columbine's pollinator partner. The bird and the flower could not be more charming, but it's the dynamics between the two where the real magic resides. Let me explain. Birds have an extra photoreceptor that allows them to see red incredibly well. Flowers have taken advantage of this and use the color red to communicate. As the hummingbirds fly over land on their journey, a wave of red flowers blooms to greet them. This beautiful dance of symbiosis is happening all around us, among plants and animals that have evolved together for thousands, if not millions of years. In return for planting native plants, we get a front row seat to the wonders of the natural world. It's hard work, but it's the best kind because at the end of our efforts, not only do we get biodiversity, but we get butterflies. When butterflies visit flowers, they're there for a quick drink of nectar. But if we want to support their full life cycle, we need to provide them with food when they are very hungry caterpillars. Caterpillars eat leaves, but they can't just eat any leaf. They need the leaves they have evolved to digest. Monarchs and milkweed are the most famous duo, but every butterfly and moth has a plant or even a few that they lay their eggs on. These are their host plants. At Brooklyn Bridge Park a while ago, I saw American lady butterflies visiting our flowers. So I looked at their host plants and found that their favorite was a tiny white flower called Pearly Everlasting. So I ordered a few, hoping that the butterflies would eventually find them. However, when I opened the box, it was like butterflies just materialized out of thin air and went straight for the Pearly Everlasting. We had to brush the butterflies off the plants just to get them in the ground. Now, I know that it might be a shock for some of you to hear that people like me want insects eating our garden plants, but even bugs we refer to as pests can be important for biodiversity. Long ago, at Brooklyn Bridge Park, our catalpa trees got covered in aphids. They're a common garden pest that suck the sugary liquid out of leaves. People encouraged me to spray them with pesticides, but I didn't. And the following year, we found the 2-spotted lady beetle on our catalpas. This was the first sighting of this ladybug in New York City in 30 years. And the thing about them is that they eat those tiny aphids that are on our catalpas. So if we had sprayed the trees, we would have harmed the ladybugs as well. Gardening is a long game. With patience, we can return balance to these systems. When we allow pests to live in our gardens, predators like ladybugs will soon move in. By building up biodiversity, pests are kept at bay. Most gardeners try to maintain these clean, sterile environments that are the exact opposite of what wildlife wants. The more we can stop being tidy, the more wildness we can bring into our gardens and landscapes, the better habitat we provide. Wherever possible, we should stop mowing. Why not get rid of your lawn? Or shrink it drastically. Lawns should be area rugs, not wall-to-wall carpet. Leaves that fall to the ground should be left there. They're literally called leaves. We should leave them. Bumblebees nest in those leaves, birds will forage in them, and butterflies overwinter in them as well. Seed heads can be sculptural while feeding the birds, and old flower stems can be tucked away to allow tiny bees to nest in them. All of these practices create new looks for our gardens, but part of this work is changing our ideas of beauty. Traditional gardens were often about displaying control over nature. But we no longer wear powdered wigs and hoop skirts. We don't need to be authoritarian in our garden design. And it's not all or nothing. There's almost always space on our land where we can go a little wild. The rose mallow is this tropical-looking hibiscus that grows throughout eastern North America. The stems are often cut down by gardeners in spring. But we left them up one year because we found that there were a bunch of beneficial insects that used those stems. And what we ended up with, I find absolutely stunning. It might not be a look for every garden, but certainly we can find space for it. Because a few weeks later, we found a song sparrow nest nestled in between those uncut stems. And soon, we had baby song sparrows hopping around outside of the garden. There's a direct link between that garden practice and an actual baby bird. In these scary times, it can be so hard to know what to do and how to help. But it feels great to cultivate life with your own two hands. And there's an abundance of research now to show how beneficial gardening is for our health and even our happiness. Because we all deserve to live in a healthy and thriving ecosystem. But it feels even better when we're part of those systems, supporting the plants and pollinators around us the way that they support us. Like many of you, I am at times immobilized with climate grief, thinking about the world that we're leaving for our children. But gardening honestly brings me so much hope that we can solve some very big, very serious problems, that we have the solutions already, and many of them simply involve planting flowers. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, first I want to tell you that I started planting my native garden maybe going on 3 years this spring ago, and I had help. I hired help, someone who was knowledgeable, but this past year I saw more bees than I had seen in a long time and more birds as well. We happen to have a tree that's not native in the backyard, and I did not want to cut it down. So that's where the birds hang out, in that tree. So it's something you can do no matter where you are. If you don't have a yard, you can do pots like she showed on the stoop. So anyway, I have one last video, also about 12 minutes. And then at the very end, we have a wonderful animation made by Pat Lattice, who's with us today, that I want to show you to lead into our following sessions. But after this video, then we're going to have time to talk to each other. I'm sorry we've gone a little longer than I thought, but this is called A Bold Plan to Rewild the Earth, also very inspirational, at a massive scale by Christine McDivitt Tompkins, and this is from this past April.
I'm of the first generation in all of human history to witness the decimation of wild nature taking place in every corner of the planet. This isn't a mystery, we know this. At the end of the day, it's simple mathematics. We humans expand our footprint, habitat on land and sea shrink, wildlife numbers fall, temperatures rise, and human communities suffer. And this is what keeps me up at night. But I'm also busy. Edward Abbey, the godfather of environmental activism, once said, "Sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul." And for me, the antidote to despair is to act. And the most direct action at Tompkins Conservation is to be part of the global movement of rewilding the earth. So what is rewilding anyway? It means allowing ancient nature the space and the freedom to heal itself. And when that's not possible, actively restoring territories and bringing back species who have gone missing. Rewilding is both simple and miraculous. I know this because I have lived it. Here's what I think can happen if we take on rewilding the continent at a massive scale. Because frankly, we're kind of running out of time saving the natural world. So if there was ever a moment for a Hail Mary pass in conservation, I think this is it. 30 years ago, when my late husband, Doug Tompkins, and I began working on land conservation projects, we weren't really sure what we were going to do, but we knew we would invest everything we had in terms of our time and resources to slow down the freight train of development that we saw destroying the natural world. As climbers, ski racers, wildlife people, we had long begun to witness with our own eyes, and it was time for us to react to those things that were oh so clear to us. For the two of us, that meant making a 180-degree shift of our business lives. Doug as the co-founder of the North Face and then Esprit. And for me, it was retiring from Patagonia Company after 25 years, 18 of those years as CEO. We moved to a roadless area at the tip of South America at the foot of a very deep fjord in Chile. we committed ourselves to saving as much wild habitat as we could, at first by simply buying land, ultimately acquiring over 2 million acres of key habitat in Chile and Argentina. Some of these tracts were still wild, but some were deeply degraded after a century of livestock overgrazing and deforestation and other threats. We formed teams on the ground and worked with communities and local, regional, national governments, and partnering with now 12 presidential administrations in the two countries, we gave back everything that we put together in terms of conservation lands by donating them in the form of new national parks. Yes! So far, we've initiated 15 new national parks protecting over 15 million acres. We came to know, without a doubt, that landscapes can recover, even those forests, grasslands, wetlands, hardest hit. But the more we worked saving and restoring lands and seascapes, the more we came to realize that you can't have healthy ecosystems if keystone species are missing. As Lois Chrysler said, landscape without wildlife is just scenery, and we never saw ourselves as being in the scenery business. Protecting large-scale territories is essential. You can't paint a masterpiece unless you have the canvas. But once the territory is secured long-term, we had to commit ourselves to go beyond land conservation and set our goals to leaving behind fully functioning ecosystems. Figuring out what species are missing or whose numbers are low and fragile and commit to bringing them back. And that's exactly what we're doing. Today, Patagonia grasslands, temperate rainforests are safe and whole, and nearly 2 million acres of wetlands have been protected. A total of 24 native species, which were nearly extinct, are again roaming free and reproducing in their rightful territories, from apex predators that influence entire ecosystems to seed bearers, herbivores, smaller predators, each playing out their essential role in the theater that we call life. In Chile, the population of the nearly extinct huemul deer is no longer losing ground. And after a century of livestock grazing in the Patagonia grasslands, which celebrated the killing of predators such as cougars and foxes, they are back and they are thriving. But all of this experience has shown us that this is still not enough. The speed and power of the climate crisis and the extinction crisis demand, I think, that we change our tactics again. And this time, it's got to be on a massive scale. Yes, the parks offer refuge from the forces of industrialization, and we know ecosystems can be restored. And very importantly, we know that when people reconnect with nature, it inspires them to protect it. But at the same time, if you think about it, parks, even the massive wild parks, are islands. They're not connected. And this is a huge problem because in order to survive and become resilient, ecosystems need to be connected, sometimes extensions of territories and sometimes as stepping stones. One way or the other, flora and fauna have to be able to expand over territories as they once did. So how is this done? It requires expanding strategies into the next 20 years. We have to reconnect the wild fabric of South America, both from Chile and Argentina. Our 30 years of conservation work is radiating up and out now, reconnecting habitat and species back into one full continent. Luckily, and not surprisingly, Mother Nature has already built the literal roadmap to make this possible. In Chile, this means going up the entire spine of the Andes with endangered species and down the currents to Antarctica, following marine wildlife systems beyond, and this is the point, human-made borders. As an example of this, in Argentina, rivers are natural wildlife bridges. So if we protect the rivers and the land around them, we create these continental scale corridors. Think of them as wild highways. In our kind of work, there's a saying about the role of top predators that I think helps make this clearer. In our case, if jaguars can expand their territory from north to south, east to west, then everybody else, animals, insects, flora, fauna, can, quote, walk under their legs. And that's our goal. So from Ibará National Park in Argentina, we build connections across the borders in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, and create biodiversity throughout the La Plata River Basin, the Yungas Cloud Forest, the Chaco Forest, the Atlantic Forest. There's no question that this is a very audacious next and new step. I'm 73, and for the first time in my business and conservation life, I know I'm not going to see the end of this new story. But that's okay with me. In fact, a very wise and good friend of ours, Wes Jackson, said to us years ago, if your life's work can be accomplished in your lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. Today, the original teams we built have become independent organizations known as Fundación Rewilding Chile and Fundación Rewilding Argentina. And they are continuing this work long into the future. Sometimes people ask me what Doug would have wanted and what I would hope our legacy becomes. And I always say the same thing. As proud as we are of what we've been able to accomplish thus far, none of us spends much time looking backwards. Rather, we see all the work that we've done as a foundation to build third, fourth generations of team leaders who share a common vision with us. And that is, we refuse to accept a future without wildness, without abundance, and dignified human communities. So what started as a personal journey has become a journey of many. From several dedicated individuals to whole teams, generations of teams, and communities who are joining the movement toward regenerative economies, followed by their offspring and their descendants. And finally, this journey is about bringing back large-scale territories, keeping them safe, and finding the species who are long gone missing. The jaguars, the huemul deer, the Andean condors, giant anteaters, pumas, pampas deer, the bare-faced curassow, the Darwin's rams, maned wolf, marsh teal, macaws, ocelots, red-footed tortoises, giant river otters. May they thrive long into the future. They are the legacy long after our story is told. And remember, the first step in saving nature is the rewilding of our own minds. Thank you very much.
So if that didn't inspire you, I don't know what will. And that's what One Earth Conservation is also trying to do, focusing on parrots, because parrots are found on 5 continents. So if we can help parrots, we're helping an awful lot of other places and other species. Okay, so now it's time to talk to each other and with each other. Because our time is much shorter than I hoped it would be, and next week I'll work harder to make sure we have more time to talk. I'm going to just kind of open it to the floor, and I'll start with what are your concerns and what are your hopes about the loss of biodiversity? And are you already involved in this topic in any way? Also, if you are not, did you learn something new today that maybe you didn't know? We'd love to hear about that as well. Laura Kim, I know you have to go soon. Why don't I start with you? Are you still with us? No? Okay, how about you, Pat? Oh,
Hi,
there you are.
I'm here.
Hi.
Sorry. What was your question? I'm multitasking.
Well, since I know that you have been very much involved in this, would you like to talk about anything of particular concern or something that you're particularly hopeful about as regards to saving biodiversity?
I think it's what all these presentations have touched on is that people need to be aware that this is a real and very threatening crisis. And the more you know about it, the more scared you will be, but the more prepared you are to do positive and constructive things to impact it. And not to forget that biodiversity, it was one of the first things that was taught to me when I started my career as a biologist. Diversity lends stability. So the more diverse, the more stable our structures are, no matter what they are, no matter what systems are involved, whether it's biological, societal, or if you're building a log home, being able to have diverse skills and understanding is fundamental. And one part of that piece of diversity that I'd like to touch on here, stepping out of my role as a science-oriented person, is the spiritual and intangible properties of diversity. It's so important that we embrace what these things mean to us inside of our heart, because that will result, again, in positive and energetic response to the crises. You have to have that wonder and belief in the power of nature and that we're part of it. And we're just a tiny piece, but tiny piece of a great diversity. So I don't mean to preach. That's not my job, but I think it's really important that we all gather here and in wide and worldviews and realize that this crisis affects the world and it affects our little citizen friends that share our home as much as our rose garden in the back. So sorry, I'll let you go now. And I do have to run. I apologize for being spotty attendance here today.
All right, Pat, we're going to show the parrot's lament at the end, just so you know. Vivek, I see you had a comment that you put in the chat. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I could. I don't know too much though, but it's just I've been just trying to learn what I can, and I see different camps form at times. Like there is almost tensions between the folks focused on, say, climate versus those focused on biodiversity at times, because sometimes it just opens up for more questions. And that even impacts around, like in that last video, I was kind of multitasking too, I'll confess. But when I think about like one thing I've learned over the years through these spaces is like asking what form of conservation people are doing. And I know historically in America we've thought about like what gets framed as fortress conservation. John Muir, and like when I was first watching that talk, I was thinking in those terms, and it invites for more questions around what practices there were, what engagement there are with the people who are already there. I think in that case it was someone from America coming to South America, right? And that just invites more questions around what are the livelihoods also impacted in trying to find this also goal of improving, dealing with our biodiversity crisis. And so, I've been reading some things where there's also just invites for a lot of debate around how do food systems work even. There's a lot of debate around whether you try to where some argue you may be trying to save rainforests and losing the planet in some ways, or there may be a bigger, deeper question around how our food systems work in service to both biodiversity and planet. So that's just I don't know, rambling what's on my mind lately. So thanks.
That's great. There's lots to talk about there. Laura Kim, I know you have to go, but do you want to speak a little bit to maybe the livelihoods piece that Vivek brought up? If you're able. If you're not able, then I want to open this up to any thoughts. You don't have to answer my question, or if you have any questions you'd like to ask. Anybody here? Sunny, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the Parrot Conservation Corps, because this is something that Laura Kim and I are trying to do to spread the word about this.
Well, it's very loud here.
Well, you have a sympathetic audience for that.
So, the Parrot Conservation Corps was really interesting, and every month we did webinars and conversations and homework about different aspects of different intelligences and dealing with the parrots and just any animals. And we also were asked to do mini projects, and I thought that was really exciting. And I did my mini project on a children's art, and we had an art competition here in Mexico. And the kids had to draw parrots, draw or paint or do sculptures of parrots native to Mexico. And we had it was the first time we had tried something like that. And it was in collaboration with Proyecto Santa Maria, where I work. And so it was really good. And the whole experience, and I really liked meeting. We had around 30 participants in the Parrot Conservation Corps, and they were from 12 countries. And so we all got to talk and exchange ideas and learn about the work that each of us are doing or hope to do in their particular countries. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. That's a great summary of what it's all about. I can speak to the livelihood piece a bit, Vivek. In One Earth Conservation, whenever possible, we try to pay the people, and we don't come in and tell them what to do. We come in, we help them assess the status of the parrots where they live. They then themselves become concerned and want to help and pitch in. And then we discuss the options, and they decide the path they want to take. We provide not only stipends, but training and other resources. And the goal is ultimately to turn the project over to them and have them take it over. So as our last TED Talk speaker said, they can carry on the work well beyond what we are able to do. So we're almost at the end here. And so I do want to urge you to come back next week, where we're going to begin with the status of parrots in the wild. But this animation created by Pat, who is a wonderful wildlife artist. So she did the cartoons as well as wrote it's kind of like a poem that goes with the animation. We'll give you an introduction to some of the issues we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks.
You're muted, Gail.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you for that, Pat. And yes, I'm going to provide all the links to all the videos we saw today. If you go back to the event in Ecohana, that'll be the best place where I can put it so other people can access them as well. So we're basically at time now, and I don't want to go over, although I will stay here if anyone wants to ask me any questions or anything. And next week, like I said, we're going to focus on what's being done to and for parrots in the wild. So thank you all for being here. I hope to see you again next week. And for those of you working with parrots already, please do keep up your great work.